Emanny CLOWNS Julian for being fired from the Rory and Mal podcast.
Man, Julian. I did say before, I didn't like how Julian would always try to butt into the whole Joe, Rory, and Mal. And now he finds himself on the other side of it. So I just wonder how he feels about standing on that side.
You don't feel like that's interesting considering Jaewan was just like not on the pod anymore?
Jaewan had a contract that consisted of a certain timeline. I've known Jaewan since he was a kid. I've had relationship with Jaewan before any of this pod. I got respect for him and his family.
But how can you really talk? How can you really talk about Julian like that when Julian is like he figured out potting? I think at a greater level than you.
I mean, that'd be your opinion. That's fine. The difference is this though. Like he's no longer potting. So I mean, and I think he could go ahead and do his own thing and then maybe be successful. I don't give a fuck enough about that. I just think it's funny that he's now sitting on the side of you not there no more. But I've all and make it very clear. I'm prepared for, like, let's just say the day comes where I'm no longer on the pod. I'm prepared for make the jokes and be like, oh, now you.
That's right, y'all. On the space I did, Emanny joined and I asked him about Julian's time on the Rory and Mal podcast coming to an end. And as you can see, Emanny hated on him and roasted him. Now, I did give some pushback and say, hey, you making fun of Julian, but what about Jaewan? Jaewan's not on the podcast anymore.
No bad blood. It was just come do it, see how it is, and that's that. We all knew what was coming. Y'all didn't know that. It was from October to January. It wasn't no long. I'm on there for a year, 6 months, seven. It wasn't one of those. It wasn't like one of those. We negotiated it that way because Joe also know I got mad going on.
Hey, are you being a little bit self-aware here, buddy? Now, for those of you that don't know, Julian and Emanny have an interesting history. The racially ambiguous men have found themselves at odds before. A little while ago, when Rory and Mal did an episode about the secret meeting that Jaewan and Alex had with Rory and Mal, and how they outlined how Jaewan and Alex lied about it on the podcast, Julian was speaking about the situation and was saying, oh, it looked like Parks did this, it looked like Joe did that. And Emanny would get so angry, he would go on his Patreon rant back when he used to be on the podcast a lot more than he is now. And he would say, hey, man, you shouldn't speak on certain issues. You wasn't connecting to the situation. You know, you wasn't there. And then Julian would go on my interview and say, hey, dog, this is all public knowledge.
I don't know Emanny at all.
Yeah.
But there was that one. You did a video about us or something. He responded to. No, you sat down with him. No, I don't know, Joe. I don't know these guys. So you know what I mean? Like, my opinion is pretty neutral. Yeah, I think I'm well within my right to form an opinion on things based on the public information, very public information, and the stuff that I've heard from my friend. And obviously, I have a bias to my guys here, and I regardless of bias or not, I think, you know, what was done was kind of shitty.
Now, fast forward to today, and there's been a lot of exchanges between Julian and Joe Budden, and we all know Emanny is Joe Budden's sidekick, his hype man, his people pleaser, the one who goes to trial for Joe. Remember John Gotti? Remember Sammy the Bull? Emanny is Emanny the Bull. He's the one that handles situation. He's the one that tries to get Joe's narrative out there. But anyway, Emanny the Bull now is dancing on Julian's grave, making fun of Julian and all of this stuff. Now, the pushback I gave earlier in the clip was, for all of the warts, for all of the bad stuff people say about Julian, he actually was way of a bigger impact on the Rory and Mal podcast than Emanny was on the Joe Budden podcast. First of all, Julian was actually a producer. Julian actually had moments. Emanny don't have no moments. The only thing he has is the Beyonce take he did, and that's all I can remember. Oh, and the other moments he had was the FBA thing he did where he wasn't exactly the most informed. So I thought it was a bit odd for Emanny to clown Julian's time on the Rory and Mal podcast, considering I think Julian is way better at podcasting. I know a lot of people find Julian's voice annoying, but when I sat down with Julian and when I sat down with Emanny, I felt like Julian was just more of who he actually is. He knows his identity. Even as a younger man, he's going to speak his mind. He's not necessarily going to agree with Rory just because Rory said something. Whereas Emanny, whatever Joe says, he's going to parrot it and completely agree. I remember when I sat down in my interview, every time I brought up Joe, he would say, I agree with Joe. I think what Joe said about paywalls is right. I think everything he said was blah, blah, blah. And that's how it goes, man. Let me know what you think. Do you feel Emanny is hating? Do you feel Emanny is just overplaying his hand? He even tried to protect himself by saying, oh, I know one day I might get let go from the pod. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Emanny is Joe's Memphis Bleak. Emanny can be one hit away his whole career. If I'm alive, he's on my pod somewhere. Emanny used to take shorts. He used to go on the road with Joe. Joe would say, listen, man, I ain't got no money for you. But what I do have, I have a hotel room. And if I don't have that, you can sleep on the floor, buddy. So now Joe is paying it back. But it's been a tough year for Emanny. Emanny barely is on the main pod. He is only on Patreon episodes. And I think that's a sign of demotion. Believe it or not, a lot of folks want to say, oh, that's just how they run their show. No, it's a sign. It's a sign. Mark Lamont is going to stay on the main pod. And if he's on the Patreon, it's going to be because they slacking. Mark my words. If Mark Lamont Hill ends up on the Saturday pod or the Patreon pods, it's because the cast is slacking and Joe is like, y'all don't know what y'all doing. Y'all severely hurting my brand. All right, y'all. That's my video for today. Tap in. Follow me on Twitter because this is where that conversation came from. Twitter Spaces. And Twitter is a cesspool, but it's an interesting cesspool. A lot of thinking goes on there. Sometimes really good, sometimes really stupid. A lot of people are upset at all times. There's a lot of people with a lack of identity, always trying to find their identity. They stay on Twitter all day, saddened by what is going on in their life. I know that sometimes people just go on there to hate. But this is Danny from The Stop. I got more content coming, y'all. A lot of stuff is happening here at The Stop headquarters. So tap in with the Patreon, The Stop. Tap in with the Instagram, The Stop TV. And like I said before, Twitter is where it's at. This is Danny from The Stop. Peace.